Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're tracing an absolutely fascinating journey. We're going from a blood-soaked trench in 1917 all the way to the consecration of a breathtaking modernist English cathedral in 1962. If you're studying literature, history, or the arts, consider this your masterclass on how human beings use creativity to process, well, unimaginable grief. We're looking at how Wilfred Owen's tragic World War I poetry rippled outward, translating into monumental architecture and music to help modern audiences make sense of trauma. Let's get right into it.
Right off the bat, let's start with this gripping sensory contrast. Owen writes, "What passing bells for these who die as cattle? Only the monstrous anger of the guns." Immediately, he just completely shatters the sacred silence of a traditional memorial. When you hear "die as cattle," you aren't just reading a poem anymore, right? You are literally being plunged into the mechanized slaughter of the Western Front. He systematically takes those peaceful, quiet rituals of mourning and replaces them with the shrieking, monstrous anger of artillery.
To really set the stage here, it's absolutely crucial to know where he wrote this. Owen didn't draft these lines from the safety and comfort of some distant university. No, it was 1917, and he was sitting in a hospital, recovering from the exact military trauma he was describing. He was actively suffering from shell shock. So this isn't some abstract philosophical reflection on war. It's a raw, historical record from a guy whose mind and body were carrying the very real shrapnel of that experience.
Here is our agenda for today. Anatomy of an anthem, the eyewitness to war, rising from the ashes, scoring the pity of war, translating trauma across arts, and we'll wrap up with why Owen matters today.
Section 1. Anatomy of an Anthem, Deconstructing the Sonnet.
To truly get this poem, we have to look at the fundamental irony built right into the title itself. Think about it. An anthem is supposed to be this enshrinement of noble action, right? A solemn, uplifting choral song for a religious service, or a big celebration of national pride. But Owen twists this expectation completely on its head. He uses the form to actually mock the rituals of religious mourning. For these boys, there is no uplifting salvation. They are doomed, and their only anthem is the literal sound of their own destruction.
And this brilliantly illustrates the poem's structure. For all you students out there taking notes, this poem is a sonnet, meaning it's 14 lines broken into two distinct parts, an octave, which is 8 lines, and a sestet, which is 6. Just look at how Owen plays with this structure. The octave is jam-packed with the noisy, mechanized cacophony of the front lines, with its stuttering rifles and wailing shells. Then, boom, the sestet shifts dramatically. We move to the quiet, internalized grief back home. We get the holy glimmers of goodbyes and the eyes of loved ones, the slow drawing down of blinds. It's this masterful, almost jarring juxtaposition of total chaos versus suffocating silence.
Now, notice how these specific literary devices physically replicate the trauma. Through personification, the guns are given a monstrous anger. The weapons become the emotional actors, not the men. And the alliteration, oh man, the stuttering rifle's rapid rattle. Owen literally forces you to replicate the staccato sound of machine gun fire with your own mouth when you read it out loud. It's brilliant. Finally, he uses this dark metaphor where the pale brows of the girls back home act as a pall, the cloth draped over a coffin. The physical objects of mourning are entirely replaced by the permanent psychological scarring of the survivors.
Section 2. The Eyewitness to War, the Aesthetic of Direct Experience.
So, how does this build our understanding of the author? Well, there's this concept in literature known as the aesthetic of direct experience. It's basically the idea that only the people who actually fought and witnessed the trauma firsthand have the authority to speak the absolute truth about war. And Owen's perspective carries immense weight because he embodies this aesthetic perfectly. He is speaking to us directly from the trenches. He isn't romanticizing the conflict from afar. He's an eyewitness to the slaughter, dragging the devastating truth back to the civilian world.
What's really fascinating here is the violent collision between two completely different worlds. Before the war, Owen was deeply, deeply inspired by romantic poetry. He absolutely loved the beauty of John Keats. But once he became a soldier, his desire for romantic self-expression just crashed headfirst into the coarse, alien language of army training. I mean, he really struggled with how a pass in botany or a love for Keats could possibly teach him how to lunge a bayonet or survive a machine gun drill. His poetry basically became this space where the fragile, beautiful civilian body was brutally exposed to military dehumanization.
Section 3. Rising from the Ashes, Spence's Coventry Cathedral.
Let's leap forward in time a bit to 1962 and see how this exact same eyewitness perspective of trauma, this intense juxtaposition of the sacred and the profane, was literally built into physical stone and glass.
During World War II, the original 14th century Coventry Cathedral was bombed. It was completely destroyed, leaving nothing but the outer walls and a single spire. But when it came time to rebuild, architect Basil Spence made this incredible, bold choice. He chose not to build over the past. He didn't sweep the destruction away. Instead, he preserved the open-air ruins of the 1940 air raid as a permanent memorial, and he extended his striking, modernist edifice northward, growing right out of the destruction. He essentially froze the trauma in time.
Stepping inside the new structure, the spatial design acts as a narrative irony itself, very much like Owen's sonnet. It physically guides the visitor from the old, ruined walls, past a charred cross made of salvaged timbers from the bombing, and straight into this pristine new interior. Your eye is drawn immediately to Graham Sutherland's massive tapestry, Christ in Glory. It is a literal path from wartime sacrifice and ruin to post-war resurrection. The architecture itself forces you to experience the juxtaposition of man-made devastation against the human hope for spiritual renewal.
Section 4. Scoring the Pity of War, Britain's War Requiem.
So we've covered poetry and architecture, but how does a composer act as a translator for Owen's tragic imagery? Enter Benjamin Britten and his absolute masterpiece, The War Requiem, which was commissioned specifically for the consecration of this new Coventry Cathedral. Britten brilliantly contrasts the certitude of eternal salvation found in the traditional Latin Mass against the earthbound, modern engines of slaughter described in Owen's contemporary English poetry. Picture this. On one side of the stage, you have a choir singing in Latin about heavenly peace and timeless harmony. On the other side, you have a solo tenor singing Wilfred Owen's grim, bleeding poetry in English, backed by dark, dissonant orchestral music. It's a literal musical battle between the promises of heaven and the horrific realities of the trenches.
And look at how Britten explicitly translates Owen's literary devices into musical ones. Where Owen used alliteration for the stuttering rifles, Britten uses staccato double reeds and snare drums to literally mimic the gunfire right there in the concert hall. He also heavily features a specific musical interval called the tritone. Historically, this was known as the devil's interval because of its harsh dissonance, and Britten uses it to reflect unresolved earthly agony, constantly interrupting the peaceful holy choirs. Even the harp and chimes aren't used for an angelic effect. Instead, they mark the quick, relentless pace of a military march. It is just an astonishing translation of poetry into sound.
Section 5. Translating Trauma Across Arts, a Student Matrix.
To tie this all together, and this is especially useful for the students utilizing this explainer as a study guide, we can map exactly how these artistic mediums connect. Across poetry, architecture, and music, the very same sensory juxtaposition of the sacred and the profane ripples outward. Think about it. In poetry, Owen juxtaposes church bells with wailing shells. In architecture, Basil Spence juxtaposes medieval ruins and a charred cross with a pristine modern altar. And in music, Benjamin Britten juxtaposes the peaceful Latin Mass with the dissonant, agonizing tritone and snare drums. Across decades, and across entirely different disciplines, the fundamental expression of communal grief remains exactly the same.
Section 6. Why Owen matters today. Shared processing.
So, why does all of this matter for us today, decades after these specific wars ended? Why do we still read Owen's words? Well, the modern relevance of this interplay is profound. By translating Owen's words into accessible physical spaces like Coventry Cathedral and accessible sounds like the War Requiem, artists like Spence and Britten essentially dismantled the barrier of the aesthetic of direct experience. You don't have to have fought in the trenches to feel the weight of what happened. This art allows non-combatants to safely share in secondhand trauma. It proves that art isn't just about making pretty things, right? It functions as a vital, necessary vehicle for communal healing, shared empathy, and ultimate reconciliation across generations.
As we reflect on Wilfred Owen's enduring legacy and the truly incredible ways his pain was transformed into communal beauty, I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Take a look around your own city or community today. How do the memorials, the architecture, and the music in your own life use art to bridge the gap between historical trauma and modern healing? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.